Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Way of Life podcast. Before we get into tonight, for those of you who have joined us for the first time or you're tuning in, this isn't what we do every single week here at Wynnum Baptist, which is where we host this. This is something we do once a month just to wrestle with different topics. And that leads me into why we do this. Way of Life, we see that everyone picks a way of life. Everyone lives a way of life, and the way that you pick actually really matters. It affects how you live, how you think. The fundamental questions of life and how you answer them actually matter. So we invite different people to come round and to wrestle with different topics, experts in their field or experienced people in their field. And we invite you to wrestle with it, to ask questions as well. So you'll notice as we go along that we're going to have some, there'll be, time after the main talk, where we're going to have some Q&A. So that's on a program, a website called Slido, SLI.do. You'll see it come up on the screen anyway. And so make sure you're getting your questions going through your head. You might want to put them up throughout the main talk. And the code, if you're after it right now, is 629088, I believe. 629088, but it'll be coming up. But without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker, a close friend of mine and colleague, Andrew Stoff. Let's give him a clap, everybody.
Thank you.
Andrew, I've been bugging you to do this for a long time, so I appreciate that you caved. How are you going?
I'm okay. I've been watching this for a while now, and I thought I'm never ever doing that. But yeah, you bugged me enough, and I'm here.
That's good.
I just come back from a trip to out west, Chinchilla. So
nice.
Literally just got here about 3 minutes ago.
Oh, nice.
And so just rocked up.
Yeah, he was sending me updates of where he was, and it was like looking at 5:29. I'm like, wow, 1 minute early. Good work. So Andrew, just for those who are watching now or into the future, just want to see if you wanted to tell us a little bit about yourself currently, and then we'll dive into what you used to do before you came here.
Okay. Well, I'm now a pastor at the church here, Wynnum Baptist, and but before that, my wife and I, my family, were in Togo in West Africa, and we were missionaries there. So we were there for about nearly 10 years. So yeah, Togo, for those who don't know, it's a tiny little country in West Africa, about the size of Ghana. Not of Ghana, of the Tasmania, that's it. Tasmania.
The one that we always forget about at the bottom.
That's it, down the bottom there. 8 million people, so it still doesn't feel crowded, so it shows you just how enormous Australia is, really. Yeah. And so we were there mainly focused on church planning. Yeah, so I wondered if you could set the scene. So what was life like over there, and how did it differ to Australia? Okay. So I guess when we think of Africa, much of Africa isn't kind of like the pictures that we have in our heads of thatched roofs and mud bricks. But that was life in Togo. We actually lived in a town, so we had facilities and everything. Yeah. But where we worked most of the time, it was thatched roofs, mud brick, very subsistence farming. Yep. Kids died early of malaria and all sorts of different diseases and hard life. Wow. Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to question that in a second, but why did you, I want to know, why Togo, Africa? Before meeting you, I didn't even know it was a place. Yeah. No one knows this.
Yeah. Why Togo? How did you even find out about it? How did you know? These are a lot of questions, but how did you know you were going to go there? Why Togo?
Well, so Julia and I it's been a while since I've had. It was right in my early childhood that I must have listened to missionaries come to church, and and probably read books about missionaries. So I always had a heart for missions. It's something that resonated with me when I heard those stories. And had a heart for Africa. I don't know whether it was just a bit exotic or that's where you hear missionaries come from. But always wanted to go there. And as that kind of developed, I met Julia when I was 15, and I remember talking about it with her on a camp when I first met her. And she also had the same type of thoughts as well.
It was love at first sight.
That's it. Found her. And then when we started looking a bit more deeper, I was looking for somewhere particularly with a people group that were unreached and that not many people were going to. So Togo fit that bill. Not many people know about it, lots of language barriers. And I was particularly interested in animistic people groups.
What are animistic people groups?
Yeah. So animistic people groups is basically a way of viewing the world in that spiritual forces and powers animate and inhabit all of life. So don't really separate the physical from the supernatural. It's all
intertwined.
Kind of intertwined. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
In relation to the way they see the spiritual realm, most animists will see that there is a supreme creator God, but somehow in the distant past, they'll normally have some type of story that articulates this, that there was a separation between man and that supreme being, creator God. Some give stories for how that happened, but most of them know that something happened, and now they need to interact with lesser gods in order to be protected and to have some control over their environment.
That's fascinating. Did you find, just a little offshoot, we won't stay here for long, but did you find that there were kind of reasonable, any overlap with like the Bible in those kind of stories?
Basically, so in the area that I worked mainly, the supreme god was known as Eso, and I was able to call the father god Eso because there was so much foundational truth that was already there in their culture that I just have to get some framing, and that Jesus came to reveal who Eso was and also to bridge that gap.
Wow.
And to restore the relationship. So
that's fascinating.
Fertile soil.
Sorry?
Fertile soil.
Fertile soil.
Yeah.
So did they ever hear anything about like God, Jesus in the past that you're aware of in that kind of area?
We came across people who could maybe be described as God-fearers. There was something, a number of people had already had a vision or a dream about Jesus before we actually came there.
Wow.
So
I know you've got a really cool story that you're going to share about something about that. So put us back on the highway per se. What did you actually do over there once you got there? And maybe you want to tell us just a little bit of your story leading up to it, like between when you were 15 and when you actually got there.
Yeah, so we were 15. So met Julia there. I got married to her after school. Always had a heart for missions, but we didn't feel like it was quite the right time. So we went and got educated, got a job, did all those things. Kind of kept that fire going by going to different mission conferences and always chewing the ear off different missionaries that we knew. And there was one time I remember I was at school. I was in the classroom and I'd written down that it was time to start looking into it. And went home and went and told Julia that. Yeah. And she actually brought out her diary from that day and she'd written down exactly the same thing. So,
wow.
So yeah, we started looking into where we'd go, and we did a survey trip. So that's a trip to really see what's happening. And we went through Ghana, Nigeria, Benin. Benin is where voodoo started. And we thought we might be going there first of all, and then Nigeria as well.
Wow.
And we just felt that God, well, we actually got stuck in Togo because they wouldn't let us stay in Benin.
All right.
But we felt like God was saying yes to that. And we met a team there that was involved in church planting, and went and joined them.
That's so cool. So what did you do once you got there? What was kind of your main mission kind of going into it, and did that change at all, I guess is my question.
So my real passion was to see people who didn't know Jesus come to know him, and I thought the best way to do that was through church planting.
Yeah.
So it was hard going. We had to learn a totally different culture and a way of communicating, and 42 different languages in Togo. So,
Just a few.
Yeah,
Yep.
just a few.
Was there a predominant one that you could kind of use with most people, or did it actually change significantly?
We used French,
Yeah.
but a lot of people didn't speak French,
Yeah.
and it wasn't their heart language. So.
And you had to learn that?
Yeah, we learnt French. Did a year in France. That was amazing. No kids in French Alps. So
Lots of cheese.
yeah,
and
pick a
crackers.
francophone African country to go to, and then you get to live in France for a year. Fantastic.
Sounds great.
And so we saw about 3 churches planted in the first 5 years.
Wow.
So that was good, but it was hard going, especially when there was 3 churches in the midst of just lots and lots of people that needed to know Jesus. So slow going.
Like how many? Like, could you give us a rough estimate of what that would be? How many people kind of in Togo?
8 million people in Togo.
Yep.
There's quite a lot of Christians there, but where we were working, there were very few Christians in some people groups had very, very few, handful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you planted a few churches within the first 5 years.
Yeah.
How did you, I know there's different philosophies when it comes to how you do mission and things like that. Did anything kind of change along that? I know you've told me stories of how something really quite changed in how you did it. So did something, did you originally do it, and then what changed and how did you do it from there?
So we basically, we looked for some nationals, so some Togolese people who were already doing church planting, and we partnered with them. And that went really well. We went and basically we took people through the story right from Genesis through to Christ, and we did something called a Discovery Bible Study, where you just ask some simple questions. What do you learn about God? What do you learn about people? And how do we put this into practice? How do we obey? But it was, there was a certain event that happened that really changed everything for me, and that was we went into an area. It was probably about 3 hours away from where we lived, so absolutely in the middle of nowhere. Like white guys don't go there ever.
Yeah, right.
So all the kids come running out and either point at you or run away.
Why were you there in the first place? If you remember.
I had motorbikes,
okay.
and we love to explore.
Okay.
So,
for 3 hours.
yes.
Yeah.
So, and I love to go out I would look on Google and look at cool areas that I thought would be cool to explore.
Yep.
And little villages, so would just go out and see what was out there. And there's one particular village. There was a guy named Al-Azhar there, and we came down his road, and as we came, well, it wasn't really a road; it was more of a little path thing, and came up to his group of huts. They kind of have a group of huts, one hut for each wife, and a hut for the kids, and then a hut for storage.
Yeah,
They're kind of all joined together.
Interesting.
And he was coming out towards us with his wife, and she dropped to the floor and just kind of started yelling and crying and waving her hands up in the air. We had no idea what was going on.
Yeah. And
later we find out that Al-Azhar had actually been had a dream of Jesus appearing to him. He was putting a death curse on some people who ripped him off, basically, and Jesus told him not to do it, to follow him, and that he would send 2 white people and 1 Togolese to speak to them and to teach him about Jesus. And his wife basically thought he was nuts because she's like, white people never ever come out here.
Because he was having these dreams for a while, wasn't he?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah, reoccurring for 3 years. And so and she was just, I think she was probably glad that her husband wasn't nuts. But so that was the kind of the catalyst. Then we started visiting him and starting teaching him, and a little church formed out there. And one day I was on my motorbike and I was heading home, and another guy kind of ran out onto the path, and he tried to stop me, and he waved me down, and I stopped, and he said, "Oh, you've got to come and tell us about this Jesus as well that you've been telling Elazar about." And I said, "Yeah, no problems. We'll do that." And I was heading back home after that, and I just realised that really I wasn't going to be able to get out to him for a long time, because we were in so many places already.
Yeah.
And I passed by just village after village after village, and something just broke in me, because I realised how slow and how many people needed to know Jesus. And I remember crying and kind of ugly crying in my helmet, and just asking God that he would send harvesters into the harvest field.
Yeah.
And I felt like God just said, you need to train those harvesters. So we completely changed what we did. We looked at finding existing Christians from other people groups, or those small amount of Christians who were already Christians.
Yep.
And we started a training program specifically for, it wasn't a Bible college, it was specifically to train people in making disciples, and then grouping those disciples together in churches.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
How many people did you start getting to that? Like, what kind of formed out of that?
So our first group, there was about 20 students. They stayed with us we met together once a month for about 3 days, and I spent many hours and days. We slept out there together in the middle of nowhere, and learned to love those guys. And each one of them, they had to get to the next stage of the training, they had to at least plant one church. And many of those first original 20 guys are actually the leaders of many groups of churches now.
Wow.
So just talking to Cheo, that's the person who I left the school in his hands.
Yeah.
He was saying that there's probably been about 300 to 400 students that have come through the school now.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so fantastic. That's really cool. And how many just now, not that it's, I'm cautious about like kind of going, there was success and all this kind of thing, and like all glory to God and things like that. But like, what did God do over there in terms of like how many churches, like little church plants? Because what I'm assuming a church doesn't look like this type of thing. It's kind of more, is it like a house church? Like, could you explain what they looked like? Yeah. Probably a better question.
So we would describe a church as that once it has some type of functioning leadership, and we actually don't class. This is the way they define it now: is that they don't class a church as a church until they've planted another smaller group.
Yeah.
So
that's cool.
Basically, until they've planted another group, they don't actually class it as a church yet. The idea is basically to get the idea that we are a multiplying people. Yeah.
Okay.
And there would be a church could be anywhere from some churches only have 20 or 30 people, some a couple of hundred.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is a bit of a random one, but I part of what I want to kind of go into a little bit of is kind of the spiritual climate, the difference between over there and here. And I don't want to make it a scary thing, but more to kind of help us think about this and kind of go, is there something we're missing out on here? Is there something we're oblivious to? That type of thing. But you mentioned it before in the Lazarus story about a death curse. I don't think most people, I don't know what that is, but I wondered if you might be able to tell us what that is and kind of some of the, I guess, the spiritual stuff you might have seen.
So this is where it does get a bit weird. I think we see that our battle is not against flesh and blood, and the scriptures tell us that very, very clearly. And I think that's true here, but it's much more overt in Togo, and they solicit that. So they solicit interactions with the spiritual beings. With Lazar, there was actually some people that wrongfully accused him of something, and he was put in jail for 3 months. When he got out of jail, there's different curses you can do, and there's certain procedures that you go through to be able to do that. And he tried it on some cattle at first, and all those cattle died. Wow. And he then got up the night later to do that as well, and that's when before he got up, Jesus appeared to him in a dream and said not to do that. So it's a very overtly spiritual place, and there's some real spiritual power both in
So would you see stuff like that happen quite often? Like, I guess, a death curse or that type of side of things?
So we would see...
If that's an okay question to ask.
That's fine. Many people are possessed in some way by demons or demonized. They're often given to a demon at birth. Often a witch doctor will heal them in some way, but that will mean that they will have an attachment to a demonic entity.
Wow.
That will cause sickness in them, torment them. For protection, they actually call it, they buy the spirit in some way.
Really?
So they go to a witch doctor or another area where they can kind of make an allegiance with that spirit. Especially there's one strain of churches at the moment that almost everybody who's come to Christ has come to Christ, and they've either seen a deliverance from a spirit or a healing of their body. It's quite prevalent in this particular area. It's actually the area where I asked God that He would raise harvesters up. There's a bit of a revival going on there at the moment, which is exciting.
Could you speak into that maybe a little bit? Is that the Burma region that you've talked about before? Yeah. Oh, no, cool. Yeah.
There's a few. So there's different streams of, I call them streams of churches. So they have different flavours. So the one in the area where I met that guy in the middle of nowhere, and then was asking for God to send harvesters into that area. That particular area is led by a guy named Lazar, and he's a man of extraordinary faith, and has just seen some amazing gifts of healing, and healing of land, healing of people, healing of factions that used to be between people groups, and so all of those churches have that characteristic in that most of the people have had some type of encounter like that, a power encounter. Yeah. Another area is the Burma. If you look that up, it's a World Heritage Site. They've got there's these really cool mud brick houses, and they're actually 2-story. They used to defend from. They're great. They're really dark as you go in there, and they've got all these places where they'll hide with arrows, and they would heat oil and actually pour it through a hole and pour it over you. They're not in tribal warfare at the moment, but they're like little fortresses. And that area, it's had the Bible translated for about nearly 40 years, I believe. But there were very, very few Christians in that area. The only Christians were from different people groups and just a few Tamboma. And our students were actually, when they got around the end of their 2 years of training, they felt like God was saying that they were to reach that area. So they gathered together and started to pray for this region. And there was something like an Acts 2 or Acts 4 moment where the Holy Spirit was poured out upon them, and they went out in great boldness and in power. And now there's a road that runs right through it's a dirt road, but right through the Tamboma region. And there used to be very, very, very few churches with non-Tamboma people in them, but now there's churches all along that road. Out of that movement that happened. That's
fantastic. And was that all Togolese people, or was it other missionaries from around? All Togolese people.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's fantastic.
It actually works best once we're out of there.
I was going to ask that. Did you find basically it was an equipping of the people in that area that worked best? Obviously.
Yeah, definitely. We went back with a team and from our church, and went back there, and I went to some of the. I think it was a third or fourth generation church, so from the one that I knew about first of all, and they had absolutely no idea who I was, and that was an absolute delight. To be in that church, knew where it had started. It was great for them to have no idea who I was.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Curious. So you were talking about that kind of revival stream, and even like the healings of the land and things like that. Kind of wouldn't mind hearing just some of your cool stories of some of the cool things that God did and you saw, because I don't know, I've never heard someone say the healing of a land before, or not very often. And I know that I guess you said it before, that people were like possessed by something at some point, and kind of some of your experiences there as well would be awesome.
So lots of the area in Togo, the soil is really, really poor, and it's difficult to grow crops. They have corn and sorghum, and it just strips they actually do cotton as well, and that absolutely strips the soil of nutrients. It gets difficult. And what they'll actually, this was new to me actually. Daria and Cho would pray for this every time they'd go in. But when someone would become a Christian, they would pray not only for them, but for their work and over their land as well. And we saw God miraculously just restore the health of the land.
Wow.
When the owner came to believe in Christ. So that it was. It's amazing some of the church leaders, because you get ostracised when you become a Christian over there often. But it was just neat. Like they would plant their crop, and it would be well above your head, and everybody else's would be this high.
Really?
And it was just a testimony to God's grace and favour upon them. What other kind of miracles, I guess, did you see? I'm not trying to harp on it as if this is the weird thing that we want to hear, but I'm just, it's like full context for whoever's listening. Like I see Andrew quite a lot, and sometimes he'll just kind of casually tell some stories from his time in Togo, and I'm like, what? That happened? And I'm like, really? And then, which is why I've been bugging you to come on so much. But like, I guess, okay, I'll frame it with a question. So you grew up kind of around the Bayside area, quite a reformed type theology for quite a long time, fairly conservative. Like, as far as I know, you didn't really think that there was kind of, I guess, gifts of the Spirit and like so much like healings and things like that. How did you deal with that once you got to Togo? So I had a not great experience with some went to a conference, a Pentecostal conference, and a charismatic church conference, and there was some stuff there that just didn't sit with me very well.
Yeah.
And as there can be some excesses in different movements at times. And I went to the point where basically I believed that all of the more miraculous gifts had come to an end, and had lots of biblical evidence for that, as I thought. And so that was interesting. I went to Togo with that mindset, and that kind of got blown up pretty quickly, and basically because I started to see God just do amazing things. Heal people of boils. There's people with what happens there if you break your limb. Often they don't set it properly, so you're kept with a limp.
Right.
Saw them. Those things restored.
Wow.
Infertility. We saw that often. Lots of different things.
Yeah.
That we saw God do. Lots of people as they were being baptised. There would be something spiritual going on. Some oppression that would be dealt with then as well.
Yeah.
So that was it. Kind of. That was actually really hard. Actually, the really hard part for me was when it affected me, and that was. So I had a number of people speak some pretty clear prophecies, and I had to rethink.
Bad ones or
no, good ones.
Oh, good
ones.
sorry,
Yeah, Christians that were speaking very clearly into the moment with stuff they couldn't know.
Yeah.
And then I was open at that stage to at least miracles in the sense of healings and stuff like that, and that kind of happens in Africa. And then I was on my motorbike again. I spent a lot of time on the motorbike, and I was going through an area and just praying over the different villages, and was just really moved. I think by the heart of God for those people group. Yeah. And kind of didn't have the words to say, and God actually started to speak in a language that I didn't recognise, and came to know that as tongues, and that's been a part of my journey, Christian journey ever since.
Yeah, cool.
So that view got pretty broken up.
Blown out the water a little bit.
It took me a while actually to because my experiences weren't lining up with my theology. And it took me a while to find a source that could kind of help me work through that. Yeah. And a book by Jack Deere, can't remember what it's called now. Surprised by... No, I can't remember. It's something. If you look up Jack Deere, it's one of his books. Yeah. And a guy called Sam Storms really helped me unpack a lot of that, and see that the Bible does absolutely talk about the gifts of the Spirit, that they're continuing and continuing to this day.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How did you find... I'm curious with... how did you find coming from that and probably being brought up here in Australia, how did you find any kind of encounter with the demonic, I guess, or people that were oppressed, as you said before? Like, did you find that? Like, I probably would be like, whoa, that's full on. Like, how did you go with that? Like, what was your experience with that?
Yeah, strangely, I've had quite a lot to do with that before I actually went with Togo.
Oh, right.
I'm not sure why that was, but. Yeah, so we've had a bit to do with that. So it wasn't surprising as such, that particular area of things. It was just much more overt. It's very camouflaged here, very in the background. Only comes to the surface overtly very, very rarely. But over there, it's in your face
all the time.
And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Did you think that played into, I guess, that side of life being quite normal or integrated, as you said before? Did you think that played into how people came to know Jesus? Like, was there a sense in which, it might sound funny, but they kind of clearly saw that, that Jesus, this God, was more powerful or something like that?
So animism is extremely pragmatic. So you do what works. You basically worship or make a pact. It's not so much worshipping, but making a pact, appease a spirit that actually helps you in some way. But the way I used to, and they didn't quite understand this, but I used to tell them what the spirits would do over there. You'd make a pact with them, and they would give you, I'd actually say this to them. I say, is this your experience? Is that they give you so much, and then with their other hand, they come back and they steal so much more from you. So that was the basic experience, is that these spirits they're powerful. They can influence the physical realm.
Yeah, wow.
But that's I've forgotten your question.
No, it was like, how did that, they obviously saw that God was kind of, like, what was the difference between them following those things and following God? Why was it such a clear, like, I need to go here?
So I think they did, they saw a power encounter in those healings. And it was as well saying basically, you don't have to deal with these lesser gods anymore. That Esso or the Creator God has actually sent Jesus so that you can have access with Him and to reveal who He's like. So you kind of bypass these lesser gods that are messing you up, basically.
That's really cool.
Have access to God. One of the that was quite. So what would happen is if you had a sickness or if your crop failed, they would just simply they'd make a sacrifice to that god and in a sense say thank you for your service. They'd do that through a witch doctor. Normally there was rituals and processes to go through to leave a spirit, and they'd go find another spirit from somewhere else and bring them back.
Interesting.
So they would bring that back in, so they would buy or they would do a ritual, and there would be something physical that would give that spirit permission to be over that household.
Wow.
So that was, especially when persecution came upon Christians, that was quite a concern for me, because that's what you do. If something doesn't work, you leave it.
Yeah.
But time and time again, these people would, especially, there's a witch doctor named Komla, and he came to Christ in quite a miraculous way, and he had some really terrible stuff happen to him, some really terrible persecution.
Wow.
Wife kidnapped and kids hurt quite badly, and animals destroyed and house burnt, and
serious.
And I'd go back worried about him all the time, and he would say, "Where else can I go?" Basically. Wow. So there's something of a retaining nature of the Holy Spirit. That does something deeper than just the pragmatic. What can you do for me? So it bypasses that which they have been so used to.
Yeah.
And
That's interesting. How was it? I want to move on to something in a minute, but my little side question was, how did you even go about talking to a witch doctor about Jesus?
Okay, yeah, we were just sitting. So, okay. So he's actually gone on to plant a number of churches. And,
really? Wow.
So
that is so cool.
I had an accident in Africa, a pretty bad accident. Got flown out to Germany, spent a number of months in hospital there, putting myself back they put me back together. And so it actually happened in a village. It was known as the Valley of Death. There was a spirit
Sounds
of
like
death
a lovely place.
over that, yes. So I had my accident in there, and we'd just been invited into that village by the chief to speak to them about Jesus. And the day I went to meet the chief, I had the accident there. And I was like, great.
For context, you've told me in the past that basically if people also, if they have an accident or they get hurt, basically nobody wants to take any kind of no responsibility for it. It's just like, no, I'm not going to take you to the hospital or anything.
I hit a cow once, doing about 80k on my bike, and hit a cow, hit it straight in the head. And I came off my bike and I was laying on my back and looking around, and there was a couple of guys that just ran, and a lady, and she just ran, and I was just lying on my back looking around. So I was able to get up and go, but if I wasn't, I wouldn't have been helped.
Yeah.
But it's not their fault. It's if they take me to the hospital, they get in trouble.
They have to pay for it as well.
They'll be made to pay for it. They'll be accused for doing it. So it's pretty messed up.
So yeah, you were going through this valley of death as
valley
well.
Of death, yep.
That you just got invited to go there, and you had your accident.
So I had an accident there, and it was to this village that we actually came back to.
Yep.
And we started a little church there, and it was mostly just women and children. And I remember saying to the guys, to my teammates, I was like, "No, we gotta move. Like, this is, I'm done."
Yeah, okay.
Like they were amazed that I was still alive. They saw that as a victory of the God that I was representing.
Yeah.
But I was like, there's so many places we've got to go. This is, we'll try and integrate them into something in town or something like that.
Yep.
And what happened there was, as I was actually praying and I was thanking God that He gave us so clear direction, and God, I didn't say it audibly, but I just felt Him say, like, "No, you didn't consult me on this one."
Yeah, right.
And I was kind of saying, "Thank you for giving us direction," but hadn't actually consulted Him. And that really broke us as a team, and we really repented of that, and we went back to that area, and I thought it was going to be a big revival then. Like, God calls, not revival, but things would really happen.
Yep. Yeah.
And then there was hardly any women, and just a few again. And on the third week, we were sitting down there, and everyone just started to scatter. And I was just left there with Dare, my other team.
What happened? I'm not injured.
Yeah, that's right. And the witch doctor was actually coming down, and he came and sat with us, and we just kind of sat there and we chatted for a little while. And Dare, who's my Togolese teammate, he just went, "You're an enemy of God, and you need to repent." I'm like, "Oh my, that's not the best evangelism strategy." And he just said, "I know," and gave his life to Jesus, and went back to his wife, and she had tummy pain issues that would render her pretty crippled during the day, and prayed for her, and she got healed. And then a church started really, really quickly as the witch doctor came to Christ, and then everyone kind of came in. And yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a story. I love it how your Togolese friends just like, "You need to repent," and he's like, "Yep, all right, I do." It's like, "Whoa, okay." I would imagine that would have been a bit more of a wrestle than that.
So it took him a while to get rid of, like, they make all sorts of different pacts and sacrifices with different spiritual entities, and they bury it all under their house.
Wow.
And we just learnt to allow the Holy Spirit to reveal that stuff to them. And they would come to us every so often and say, "Oh, I've got stuff under my house," and would get rid of that. And
pray into that. That's really cool. I want to switch a little bit. So I've got a quote from C.S. Lewis just to kind of frame this a little. It's, "There are two equal and opposite errors into which our race can fall about the devils or the enemy. One is to disbelieve in their existence. The other is to believe and to feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. They themselves are equally pleased by both errors and hail a materialistic or a magician with the same delight." So it appears in my mind, in hearing some of the stuff and experiencing some of the things that you have, you don't want to kind of go, there's a spiritual thing under every rock. I'm going to look for the spiritual in every single thing. And but you don't want to, I feel like one of the biggest things that I find when I hear these stories, and which is why I'm like, what is that? You just don't see it, or you don't really hear about this kind of stuff. So it's like that. And I wondered if you wanted to speak into it a little bit, but I wonder if there's more kind of going on that we might not see. And one of the greatest kind of successes of the enemy is that we don't even think he's there, or that we're not even aware of him. So how do you, I guess one of my starting questions would be, how do you reconcile what you've seen over here and life in Australia?
So the
to the best of your ability. I'm not saying you know all the answers. Yeah.
So the enemy is very, very overt over there in the way he works, often very, very forward. But over here, I think it doesn't make sense to me that the enemy wouldn't be working, because it's actually an incredibly strategic place to work, a place that is sending huge amounts of missionaries around the world, huge amounts of biblical content, and Jesus said quite clearly that our mission is to make disciples, and of all the nations, and the Western world has been quite a proponent of that, and sent many missionaries into all different corners of the world. Yeah. So it makes sense to me that the activity would be quite intense here, actually, even if we don't see it. I think it may be on a more strategic. It's probably more strategic for it to be a bit more unseen here. Yeah. But I think, the whole world system is really enveloped in the God of this world as well. Yeah. I think it probably has a lot to do in everyday stuff of life as well, and messes around there, but it can be difficult to identify. Yeah, I was going to ask, how would you go about not kind of doing the two opposites of what C.S. Lewis was saying, where you actually don't just kind of go, okay, that's the spiritual battle, we need to pray it out, or maybe they just made a bad choice, or do you know what I mean? How have you found over here to kind of level out the two in your own experience? So some lessons that I actually learned in Togo. We would go into different places and would have thoughts come into our heads. I'd have thoughts come into my heads, and they were not great thoughts, not thoughts that kind of align with Jesus's ways. And in my team, there's 4 of us, and we got very close. We spent probably 10 hours a day with each other, 5-6 days a week. So we're a bit of a band of brothers that did everything together. Yeah. So we actually got used to saying, "Hey, this is coming into my head just to so it would have no power over us, but also just to see what was going on." And we'll say it'd be something pretty specific, but pretty intrusive, and would say, "I don't know what's going on here, but this is coming into my head." And often one of my other teammates would say, "Hey, that's exactly what was in my head as well." Yeah, wow. So we started to identify that the enemy works in that way. I think he works in that way to some extent. Kind of like ideas or thoughts as well. Yep. It can feel intrusive. Where you kind of go, "Oh, where did that come from?" Yeah. Also, I think manipulates our. When we have thoughts that aren't in alignment with him, kind of gives. It's why it tells us to take our thoughts captive. Yeah. Because it gives the enemy an opportunity to kind of keep speaking lies and keep mixing with those things. Yeah. But because of the difficulty of discerning what's actually going on, and sometimes I don't think it's even necessary to know what's going on there, whether there's kind of some spiritual entity influencing you or not. In James, I think it's 4:7, it says, "Submit yourself to God and resist the devil, and he will flee from you." And I think that's a really important concept, is that submitting is the idea of coming under, and coming under God is to come under His ways and His will and His protection as well. And whenever we do something which is not in alignment with Jesus and who He is, we're actually aligning ourselves or coming under the prince of this world, and that gives somewhat of permission in a sense, because we're aligning with that. And He tells us to resist the enemy and he'll flee from you. So often what I say is if you notice something in you, and I've spoken about this before, but if you notice something going on in you or in your mind or in your thoughts or in your actions that you know is not in alignment with Jesus, that principle of resisting, of coming back under, submitting to God, coming back under His authority and under His way. So resist both I say I'm resisting anything inside of me. So we have a bent for destruction and for messing stuff up as well inside us. But we also have an enemy that works against us. So I say resist anything inside of me or outside of me that's pulling me out of alignment with you.
Yeah.
So that's...
Yeah, so it's a kind of more of it reminds me, I've been reading a book by John Mark Comer, his new one called Live No Lies, and he just basically makes the premise of kind of what you've been saying, is that often the kind of biggest thing that we see in the Bible that the enemy does is that he feeds you a lie and then you believe it as truth. Yeah. So you almost, in my mind, and then that kind of sends you on this rabbit trail of believing other lies or finding half-truths. It might sound appealing, that type of thing. So... and it will create its own destruction, and you'll let things kind of happen in that way. But do you think there's obviously then, particularly I see it in a society that is fairly well, I guess you could say, post-truth or something like that, where you can live your own truth, you can kind of believe mostly whatever you want, you can believe whatever idea you want. Is there a need then, particularly as Christians, but for anyone to really know core absolute truth, like to actually be able to identify the truth that is Jesus? Do you think that is lining up a little bit with what you're saying?
Truth is absolutely key.
Yeah.
And I think it's aligning ourselves with both truth, but also truth in what God tells us how to live, in the ways to live as well. So just making sure that we're not living in a way that that would be in alignment with the ways of the enemy.
Yeah.
So in Togo, when people were influenced by the enemy, or oppressed or demonized, or whatever you want to call it, often it would be because of some type of ritual that they entered into. It was sometimes they were given to a spirit at birth. So there's things of the will, and then there's things not of the will, especially in Togo. And found that you had to actually deal with them differently. So if it was of their volition, it was actually important that they repented from that. In order to deal with that spirit. But
there was some kind of, I guess, inherited, I guess you could say, something that they just had from the very get-go. Yeah. Do you think that at all, random question, but do you think that applies here?
Possibly.
Yeah? Yeah. Do you think there's things that we willfully kind of go, I'm going to follow that, I'm going to think that, I'm going to do this, that we kind of need to repent from, like you say, but there's underlying things that we kind of inherited, I guess?
Anger, bitterness, lust.
Yeah.
It all puts us out of alignment with out from under.
Yeah.
We still belong to Jesus if we're a Christian.
Yeah.
But if we act in a way that is out of alignment with Him, we leave ourselves open.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I'm conscious of time. I have one little question before we go to some Q&A. Is there any kind of last thoughts or cautions towards this side of thing? Because I know, I guess sometimes the temptation is to go or not for everyone, but some people, it's kind of like, this is very real. I want to test this out. Or I want to go play with like some random things and see what happens. But I know you've told me in the past that it's kind of sometimes you need to know what you're up against, and if you don't, it can be pretty harmful.
Yeah. I think of the verse, greater is he who is in me than he who is in the world. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah.
In regards to spiritual warfare, really the greatest spiritual warfare that we can do is do what Jesus told us to do, and go make disciples of the nations. Every time someone else comes into the kingdom, that's one less person who's in the under the enemy.
Yeah.
And so I think he'll do anything to stop the church fulfilling that purpose.
Yeah.
I really don't think when I deal with stuff like that here, I generally not interested in speaking to spirits or anything like that.
Yep.
And generally you can get rid of the stuff which they're holding on to, which is stuff in people's lives that's in alignment with the God of this world, in the enemy. And if you get rid of the stuff that they're hanging on to, and the person comes back under the submission to God and his ways, normally that's...
I guess that's what comes to mind is why repentance, I guess, is quite key. You're actually turning away from something and you're turning to something. You're consciously doing that, like you were saying before. Thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate you telling some of your story. I know it's a big part of your life, and we talk about it a bit. So I really appreciate that you've opened up to us and those who are watching online. And I know this is a little bit of a different podcast for those of you who are watching now and into the future, but I thought it was a really important thing to start wrestling with wherever you sit on this. But for those of you watching, if you found this helpful, then feel free to share it around, subscribe, whatever you do. We're not here to be famous or whatever. We're just here to help as many people as we can with the content that we do. So we're going to head on over. We're going to have a 5-minute break, everyone, for those of you who are here or are streaming online. And then we're going to have some Q&A just for a little bit of time. So make sure you get your questions in. Make sure you vote for the questions that you want. And we'll be back soon. Feel free to go, obviously, to the bathroom and do whatever you need to do. Cool.
Excellent.